So, as editor of Gardener's World magazine,
Yes.
how do you broach the subject of wildlife and nature?
Well, as a gardener, you tend to look at nature as being actually your friend in the garden. And maybe that's changed. I'm not even saying maybe. It absolutely has changed in the last 5 to 10 years. Gardeners are really aware of the fact there's a great partnership goes on between you as a gardener and the nature and wildlife around, because they're all contributing. Hey, you're sharing their space as much as we're sharing, as we're inviting them in. And actually, there's a terrible problem at the moment with the terrible weather we've had of slugs and snails and so on. And actually, it's not a problem if you do encourage wildlife in, because you need to look at the garden as a whole ecosystem. So it's not about keeping one type of plant or one type of animal out and allowing another one in. It doesn't. We all know it doesn't work like that. We are in a big ecosystem, and encouraging everything actually means encouraging slugs and encouraging aphids. But you encourage that because that's food stuff for something else. I think we're actually all developing a slightly more relaxed view about weeds, but there'll always be times when a nettle right in the middle of a lawn isn't right. But we're now really discovering that nettles have a place in a garden, for all butterflies, and we've got to be thinking about caterpillar food. If you want butterflies, you've got to enjoy the caterpillars as well.
Exactly. So, at home in your own garden, how do you garden for wildlife?
Well, I've got all sorts of plants that I leave to go all the way through seeding, and so I encourage a lot of I suppose for a start insects in with very open single flowers, and I think that's the first thing to think about is can the plants you're growing be accessed by creatures, so bees, butterflies, moths, thinking about how they feed. So some will want long tubes, some will want big wide open flowers. It's all about thinking pollen and nectar, and I think that's a real good start point. Am I providing food for creatures? If I'm doing that, then have they got somewhere to roost? So are there habitats essentially for them? And yes, I get the odd mouse, and I get a lot of voles in the garden, and they come in and feed on the bird feed I put out. So
they clean it up in a way, don't they?
They do. I mean, as do pigeons, and but it's to me it's all okay. I don't particularly want to see a rat in my garden, but ultimately, if I do, because I live in the country, so I've got a rural garden, it's actually just part of the big ecosystem. And listen,
what would you say is your favourite wild British animal?
Oh, it's a bit like saying, what's your favourite child? Well, I love all sorts of, I've been lucky enough to see hedgehogs in the garden. I've been lucky enough to see amazing birds come into the garden. I heard a nightingale recently.
Oh, fantastic.
But, I had something come into the garden recently that just blew me away. It was a weasel. And they're really unusual sighting. And the reason I think it came in is back to those voles again that I mentioned that we get in the garden, because they're quite ruthless. If you know anything about weasels, they're real, bloodsuckers. And actually, I thought it was great to see it, because I know I'm feeding the birds, the voles are coming in and eating that, and the weasels were coming in clearly, to feed on the voles. So it's that lovely cycle again. And
exactly.
I thought it was such a rare treat. For me, that was like my spring watch moment.
So it's marvellous you've been getting a weasel in your garden.
Yes.
But what else would you like to see that you haven't seen yet?
I haven't got a pond in my garden, and that's a big omission, and I will sort that one out. Because I know what I'm not seeing a lot of at the moment are, I get a few frogs through, but I don't have the number of frogs, but in particular, I don't have the newts that I have seen in the past when I have had a pond. And I think they're amazing, just such amazing creatures, and actually just watching a pond ecology come to life. And that's also looking at things like water boatmen and some of the really ruthless little pond creatures that come along and eat tadpoles. I mean, it becomes a kind of dog-eat-dog world in that pond. It's
fantastic though, isn't it? You've got the dragonfly nymphs eating the tadpoles, and of course you've got, I just think it's nice just to watch newts kind of rise and then sink from the surface of the pond.
Yes, and you mentioning dragonflies. Remind me, we once had amazing dragonflies coming out of the garden from a pond that I probably had in for no more than a year. Beautiful nymphs, the way that they kind of beat their wings to get their life into them. Yeah, and so it's so vulnerable. It sits there, and yet there you are. It's a pond at home. I'm 5 yards away from my kitchen, and I'm seeing this amazing piece of you see Attenborough going halfway around the world to see something similar, and there it is at my back garden. So that's what I'm missing at the moment, but I know how to resolve it. So I think that's something I'd say to anybody is, if you're thinking about wildlife gardening of any sort, start with a pond.